If you have been grinding in the gym, carefully managing what you eat, and still cannot explain why meaningful progress refuses to show up, I want you to stop blaming yourself, because there is a very strong chance that the advice you've been following is the actual problem. My name is Dr. David Hart, and today I am going to dismantle the most persistent fat loss misconceptions making the rounds right now. Myths that are not just ineffective, but in several cases, actively working against your progress. I have watched this play out in clinical practice more times than I can count. Patients doing everything they were told, yet arriving at my office with zero results and a great deal of frustration. The missing link is almost always misinformation masquerading as science. Whether you are 3 weeks into your first fat loss attempt or you've been cycling through programs for years, stay with me. At least one of the myths we're covering today is almost certainly in your current routine. Let's get into it. Cardio and training myths. Myth number 1. Training on an empty stomach accelerates fat loss. This idea has circulated fitness culture for decades and sounds convincing enough on the surface, the theory being that exercising before eating forces your body to rely on stored fat for energy. Physiologically plausible as a concept? Marginally. Practically meaningful as a fat loss strategy? The data says no. What the research consistently demonstrates is that total caloric balance across the full day is what governs fat loss, not the metabolic state you happen to occupy during a 45-minute workout window. What fasted training advocates conveniently overlook is that working out without adequate fuel almost universally results in reduced training intensity and impaired recovery. You push less hard, you compensate with food later in the day, and the net outcome is statistically indistinguishable from training in a fed state. In my clinical practice, when a patient raises this question, I ask them one thing: will you perform better or worse without eating? Their honest answer settles the matter. Prioritize adequate fuel, train at full capacity, and let your total daily caloric balance do the actual work. Cardio and training myths. Myth number 2. HIIT is the superior protocol for burning fat. High-intensity interval training earned its popularity for legitimate reasons. It is time-efficient, it elevates cardiovascular output, and it genuinely works. But the cultural narrative that it is categorically superior to all other forms of cardio for fat loss has caused real, measurable harm to people's long-term results. Here is what the peer-reviewed literature actually shows. High-intensity training significantly elevates post-exercise appetite, making caloric control considerably harder for most individuals. It demands a recovery investment that prevents daily repetition without accumulating physical fatigue. And fatigue, physiological or psychological, is the primary driver of program abandonment. The most effective cardio protocol for fat loss is the one you can execute with consistency across months and years, not weeks. For most people, that means pairing lower-intensity steady-state work with periodic high-intensity sessions, rather than treating HIIT as the exclusive tool in the toolkit. Variety in cardio selection is not just preference. In physiology, it's strategy. Nutrition fundamentals. Myth number 3. Breakfast is metabolically essential. Skip it and you slow your fat burn. I cannot overstate how thoroughly this claim has been dismantled in peer-reviewed nutrition science, yet it persists, largely because decades of breakfast food marketing embedded it in public consciousness as metabolic fact. The concept that consuming food within a fixed window of waking somehow activates your metabolism is not supported by current evidence. Metabolism does not function like a furnace waiting for kindling. It's a continuous adaptive biochemical process governed by total energy intake, hormonal signaling, and lean body mass, not meal timing in isolation. Delaying your first meal does not trigger a starvation response. That's simply not how human physiology operates. The one clinical nuance I will offer: if muscle preservation or development is among your goals, distributing protein intake across multiple meals throughout the day does appear to provide a modest benefit to muscle protein synthesis rates. Not because any particular meal is uniquely essential, but because protein distribution across waking hours has functional value. Eat when it fits your schedule and supports your performance. Total intake is the variable that matters. Nutrition fundamentals. Myth number 4: fruit is a hidden source of fat-promoting sugar. This myth frustrates me clinically because it has led patients to remove one of the most nutrient-dense and metabolically supportive food categories from their diets based on a fundamental misunderstanding of nutritional biochemistry. Yes, fruit contains fructose, and fructose is technically a sugar, but the behavior of naturally occurring sugars within whole fruit in the human body is mechanistically distinct from refined sugars in processed food. Whole fruit delivers dietary fiber, which substantially slows absorption and modulates glycemic response. It provides micronutrients essential for cellular function. It contributes to daily hydration. The metabolic impact of consuming a whole piece of fruit is not remotely comparable to an equivalent quantity of extracted sugar. Unless you are consuming fruit in quantities that genuinely exceed your total daily caloric targets, which would take a very deliberate effort, it is not the variable responsible for stalled fat loss. Moderation, as with all foods, is the operative clinical principle. Training science. Myth number 5: shortening rest periods during lifting sessions burns more fat. I want to illustrate this one practically because this particular myth transforms structured strength training into something it was never designed to be. When rest intervals are severely compressed during resistance training, sessions begin to resemble metabolic conditioning circuits rather than progressive overload protocols. And while metabolic conditioning serves a legitimate purpose, it is not the mechanism through which you preserve muscle tissue during a caloric deficit. That volume collapse is not muscular failure. That is cardiovascular system limitation preventing adequate output recovery between sets. And that lost volume represents a lost anabolic stimulus for the muscle tissue you have been working to build and retain. During a caloric deficit, where muscle preservation is already physiologically challenged, this matters enormously. Lift with intensity and appropriate recovery to preserve what you have built. Keep cardio as a separate stimulus. Do not blur them at the cost of both. Myth number 6: greater training volume always produces superior outcomes. This is one of the most well-intentioned myths on this list and consistently one of the most damaging. The belief that more volume, more frequency, and more hours in the gym automatically translates to accelerated progress ignores the most fundamental principle in exercise physiology: the necessity of recovery. There is a clinical condition called rhabdomyolysis, a breakdown of muscle tissue at a rate the kidneys cannot safely process. That is the extreme end of the spectrum, but the principle holds at every training level. Beyond the threshold of effective stimulus, additional volume produces diminishing returns and progressively escalates injury probability. For fat loss specifically, I encourage patients to identify what I call the minimum effective dose, the least structured cardio and caloric restriction that still generates measurable, consistent progress. A moderate deficit maintained with discipline over 12 months outperforms an aggressive, unsustainable protocol abandoned after 6 weeks every single time. Design a program you can live with permanently, not one that temporarily consumes your life. Diet myths that derail progress. Myth number 7: carbohydrate elimination is required to achieve fat loss. Carbohydrate restriction has become so entrenched in popular fat loss culture that many people treat it as established clinical consensus. It is not. The evidence is consistent and clear. Fat loss occurs within a caloric deficit regardless of macronutrient composition. Carbohydrates are not uniquely or preferentially stored as fat in a state of energy balance or deficit. What carbohydrate restriction does accomplish, and this is clinically legitimate, is that it can make it mechanically easier for some individuals to reduce total caloric intake. Fewer processed carbohydrate-dense foods often means fewer appetite-stimulating triggers. But the fat loss itself is driven by the deficit, not by carbohydrate avoidance as an independent mechanism. It is also worth noting that glycogen, the storage form of dietary carbohydrate, is the primary fuel for high-intensity exercise performance. Patients who adopt severe carbohydrate restriction during structured training programs frequently report meaningful reductions in workout quality and output. Over sustained periods, this compromises muscle retention, the very tissue that supports your long-term metabolic rate. Carbohydrates are physiologically valid and functionally useful. Quantity and context are the relevant variables, not elimination. Myth number 8. Eating clean guarantees you will not gain fat. This conversation has presented itself in my clinical consultations more often than almost any other nutrition topic. A patient describes an objectively healthy diet, whole foods, minimal processing, nutrient-dense choices, and expresses genuine confusion about why body weight continues to rise. The explanation is invariably caloric surplus. Energy balance operates independently of food quality. Avocados are nutritionally exceptional. They are also exceptionally calorically concentrated. Mixed nuts deliver outstanding micronutrient profiles. They are also exceptionally easy to consume in quantities that exceed daily energy requirements without registering as a meal in your conscious awareness. The clinical principle is this: food quality governs your health outcomes and physiological function. Total caloric intake governs your weight direction. Both matter enormously, but they govern different outcomes. You can accumulate body fat consuming exclusively high-quality whole foods if your total energy intake exceeds your expenditure. Track your consumption with honesty. Respect both the quality and the quantity of what you eat. Final 2 myths. Myth number 9. Targeted exercise removes fat from specific body regions. Spot reduction is one of the most persistent concepts in fitness culture and one of the least supported by scientific evidence. The premise that contracting muscles in a specific area selectively mobilizes the fat stored adjacent to those muscles is physiologically incorrect. Fat mobilization is a systemic, hormonally regulated process. When your body operates in an energy deficit, it draws on fat stores according to a genetically predetermined distribution pattern, not in response to the specific muscles recruited during exercise. Where you carry your most resistant fat is typically the last place your body releases it during an extended cut. That reflects your individual physiology, not a failure of your protocol. Resistance training targeting specific muscle groups does contribute to regional body composition changes, but through muscular development that improves the structural appearance of those areas, not through localized fat removal. Total body fat reduction through sustained caloric deficit is the only pathway to losing fat from any specific location. Myth number 10, consuming food at night prevents fat loss. No carbohydrates after a certain hour. No eating within several hours of sleep. These directives have become so normalized that many individuals experience genuine anxiety around evening meals, anxious not because of genuine physiological risk, but because of rules with no credible scientific foundation. The evidence does not support time-based eating restrictions as a meaningful determinant of fat loss outcomes. Caloric impact does not vary with clock position. Your body does not recalibrate its energy balance equation based on the time of day. What governs fat loss is cumulative energy balance across the full day, and when that balance is consistently in a deficit, fat loss proceeds regardless of when your final meal was consumed. There are some individuals who sleep better with lighter evening meals for digestive reasons. That is a comfort and sleep quality consideration, not a fat loss one. If your daily totals are structured correctly, adequate protein, appropriate deficit, sufficient micronutrient coverage, you have genuine latitude in how you distribute those macronutrients across your waking hours. Here is the core takeaway from everything we have covered. Fat loss is not complicated. It has been made deliberately confusing by an industry that generates revenue from your uncertainty, your anxiety, and your willingness to purchase the next program, supplement, or protocol that promises to solve the problem differently. The actual clinical framework is straightforward. Establish a moderate, sustainable caloric deficit, make protein intake a genuine priority, perform resistance training with the same intensity and structure you used to build the muscle you are trying to preserve, include cardiovascular work that you can sustain across months without burning out, and stop outsourcing your logic to whoever is loudest on social media. The myths I walked you through today are not harmless misconceptions. They generate unnecessary restriction, unnecessary anxiety, and ultimately unnecessary failure. My patients who step away from these frameworks and return to evidence-based fundamentals are consistently the ones who achieve lasting, measurable results, and do so without making fitness the most exhausting part of their lives. If something in this video clarified a question you have been carrying, I would genuinely appreciate you sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for content grounded in actual clinical science, not fitness folklore. Every video I put out is designed to give you the kind of information I give my patients in a consultation. I am Dr. David Hart. I will see you in the next one.